Hi everybody, this is video number 57 of the City and Guilds Carpentry and Joinery course, and this is especially for the level 3 students of the woodworking course. And we're talking today about types of communication, and one of the most obvious and the types of communication that have been around for thousands upon thousands and thousands of years, possibly about 4,000 or 5,000 years, is the letter. And this is a very, very, very important thing. A lot of people don't write letters anymore, but of course the post still exists, and sometimes letters have to be written. There's lots of advantages to writing a letter. One of the advantages is that the person writing it can take their time and say things in a way that they think makes best sense. Also, a letter is something that is a record of what's said. Generally speaking, people might keep a copy of a letter. That enables them to be able to refer to it in the future. So a letter is a very important thing, really. And I'm going to suggest that there are 7 parts to a letter. The first thing is your address at the top. Very important to put the return address so that they can then send a letter back to you. It comes first. Sometimes it may not be necessary if it's headed paper, but otherwise if it's a blank sheet, then the return address should be right at the top. The second thing that needs to be there, very important, is there needs to be a date. You know, letters can be very confusing if you have no date on it. I remember reading a whole pile of letters many years ago, none of which were dated. So it was impossible to work out the order in which the letters were sent. That's a very important thing. The next thing is the recipient's name and possibly the recipient's address. So, dear Jim Smith, okay? Dear Jim Smith, 25 Acacia Avenue. That just means that the person opening the letter knows who it is that it's being written to. The next thing is the basic greeting. So, dear Mr. Jones, good to see you the other day. So that's the greeting. The next thing then is you might put a little sentence or just a couple of words which are the subject of the letter. So you might say building work at 10 High Street. Okay, and then the person that's opening the letter looks at it and says, oh right, so this is about the building work at the High Street. Okay, so and then the next thing then is the text of the letter, what it is that's actually written. And there's a number of things that need to be said about that. First of all, the text of the letter needs to be concise. No good rambling on and on and on. So this is why a letter needs to be thought about, and sometimes you might even need to do a couple of drafts or alter it to enable it to be right. If it's typed, it means then word processed, it means you can go back and change a sentence or eliminate a sentence or add a sentence. The next thing is it needs to be professional. You know, we don't just, dear Bill, how are you today, mate? All that. When you're in business, when you're working as a carpenter joiner, it needs to be professional. It needs to be factual. It needs to be accurate. The things that you say need to be correct as far as you are able to perceive. It needs to be constructive. There's no point slanging people off on a letter. No, it needs to be positive. You know, you can give an appreciation if you want to, but the main thing is it needs to be factually correct and constructive. It may make suggestions that are positive and helpful. And then lastly, it needs to be friendly. You know, people, can misunderstand the tone of a letter. Sometimes a letter may come and you think, oh, that was a bit sharp, or that was a bit critical. No, nobody wants to receive a letter like that. And then the last thing is there needs to be a closing phrase with your name and possibly your personal signature. Now, it goes without saying that letters don't have to be written. Some people find it hard to write letters nowadays, so a letter can be typed. In fact, when it's typed, it generally looks much more presentable. Okay, this is a skill, that our previous generations had, and they wrote lots of letters. This was their main information highway, which was to send letters. Nowadays, people use all sorts of other ways of speaking. First of all, they use verbal communication. Let me just flick this thing over to talk about verbal. Oh, sorry, wrong way. Go the right way in a minute. Verbal communication. Now, verbal communication just means to talk. It's just a fancy way of saying talking. And in verbal communication, this may be on a person-to-person basis, face-to-face, or it might be on the telephone. You know, you might pick up your phone and have a talk to somebody. But it's verbal communication. Now, just remember that when you see somebody face-to-face, you read their face. You read their tone of voice. You read how they look. Do they look happy or sad or angry or whatever? But but when it's on the phone, that's a little bit more hard to read. And so on the phone, we just need to be that little bit more careful that we're conveying what we're having to say properly. So we need to think before we speak. We need to be clear and concise in what we say, and we need to ask the people whether they've understood what you've said. And you might say it in another way so that they say, oh, right, sorry, I was misunderstanding everything you were saying, and now you've said it again, I understand better. So that's what can happen. Even with a face-to-face conversation, people can be misunderstanding. Now, it also says down here, body language. Body language actually is very important. You know, when you're standing in front of somebody, what they're doing with their body, not just with their face or their mouth, but what they're doing with their body can say a lot. For example, if they're standing there like this, that, even without speaking, that conveys an idea. Maybe they're cross. Maybe they're stern. If they're standing there like this, looking away all the time, maybe they're not interested. Okay? If they go, maybe they're just bored. You see, all of these signs, and you might have somebody with their hands in their pocket. You might have somebody standing there like this with a hand on their elbow. There might be somebody leaning against a wall. There might be somebody, combing their hair. They might be frowning like this, or they might be happy like that. All these things are messages that come from the way the body is, and they speak as much as what the words are that people say. And I noticed something else that I forgot to talk about on this sheet. At the bottom, it talks about texting. Now, when the City and Guilds Carpentry book was written, I don't know whether they just forgot about texting, but texting is very important. It's used by people a lot today. It's become one of the main ways of communicating. You can just go tap, 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 and a message is sent, and the next person receives it immediately. Just need to be careful with texting that you don't abbreviate anything too much so that people misunderstand. The other thing is video calls. Now, a video call is brilliant because you can actually speak to people face to face when they're not anywhere near you. That is an exceptionally helpful way of communicating in building work. And of course, on the far side, it talks about photography. You might explain something 100 times, but showing somebody a picture of what you're talking about says everything. Very often it says everything. If something's broken, you can just show a picture of how it's broken, and immediately they understand what that means. And I've also put in here email. Now, email is sort of, in a way, another form of writing a letter. And so I wouldn't have said that email is quite as important as some of the other methods, but it is something that works. It'll save you a stamp. It'll save you an envelope if it's going to be a letter. Send in an email. What's useful about sending an email is that you automatically can keep a copy for yourself. And emails are very, very quick. They travel at the speed of light. You can send an email to New York. It takes about 9 seconds to arrive there, but that's pretty quick. So being able to use emails is an exceptionally useful tool for working in the carpentry and joinery industry. Okay, so we look forward to catching up with you on our next episode. Have a wonderful day, and bye for now.